Hello, my fellow Extraordinary Americans. I'm Cosmos Dar, and this is Extraordinary America. What is Extraordinary America about? You see, American identity is about freedom, the opportunity for a better life, and the pursuit of happiness. However, most Americans are not free when it comes to the financial front. Most Americans are suffering from financial slavery due to loss of jobs, stagnant wages, inflation, and debt of all kinds. Wealth and income inequality runs rampant across America, and the middle class is all but disappeared. So what is Extraordinary America about? Extraordinary America is about the abolition of financial slavery. It is about the financial freedom of the 99%. It is about the nation of immigrants and descendants of immigrants awakening and unleashing the extraordinary within themselves and setting themselves free. The path to financial freedom is through entrepreneurship and investing on the light side. It is about financial education, not only when it comes to money in the monetary systems, but also in regards to how to start a business, investing, especially when it comes to precious metals and real estate. In this podcast, I interview guests, many of whom came from humble beginnings, to see how they did it and how they attained financial freedom in their own lives and how they did business. And it is my hope that you will be inspired and you will want to awaken extraordinary within yourselves and realize the American dream. Once again, welcome to Extraordinary America. Welcome back to the show, my fellow Extraordinary Americans. For today's guest, we have Kim Flick. Kim is an entrepreneur, consultant, advocate, and business coach. She's the founder of Mighty Epiphyt Consulting LLC, which is a benefit company which specializes in benefit consulting, measuring, scaling, and reporting impacts for and guiding companies through certifications, as well as transparent impact and product marketing. It has also been involved in creative branding and more for entrepreneurs, social innovators, and nonprofits. Kim guides companies through or complete for them B Lab assessments for B Corp, as well as marketing support for several entrepreneurs and small businesses. She believes that when businesses are an active voice for people and the planet, there's much good that can happen. These are impacts we can make and strive to improve upon. At Mighty Epiphyt, she advocates for and supports social impact entrepreneurs with the resources and information they need to succeed in business while measuring, improving, and recording impacts. She's an extraordinary American, and I'm glad and honored to have her on the show. Kim, are you there?
I am. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Kim, so much for doing this podcast with me. I'm really grateful. So, Kim, I know that you are an advocate and you're into entrepreneurship and you're into social impact entrepreneurship. Can you tell me and the audience a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you got started?
Absolutely. I think as a child, I noticed that there are good things that people can do for the world and bad things that people can do for a world, but it was very vague. And as I was growing up, I actually grew up overseas. I grew up in Holland, Belgium, and England until I was 13 years old, and then moved back to the United States. And during those travels and living in those countries, I was embedded in nature a lot. We lived in small towns and small villages, and I loved being out in nature. And moving back to the US, I moved into a small town and always had to have a job as a kid. So I was doing two things in my life. One is working because I wanted to and needed to, but the other was being in nature as much as I could do that. And it led me to become a biology major as a person who was going to university. And at the time, I didn't know what I would do with that. But a part-time job took me into medicine as I was earning the degree. And I became so enamored with medicine because it was biology training. It was interesting. And I got into the corporate world of medical sales as someone who had never thought about being a business person. That led me to being very exposed to business, running a territory, running a district, and being like an entrepreneur within a company. And I thought about how great business can be. And we've all seen bad examples of how business can be not for good sometimes, but I also saw the good in it as well. And I was really inspired through the years as I went through business. And I was extremely fortunate to get business training and to work for a company that helped me get an MBA. So I had this layer of this biology major who knew nothing about business and the science part and learning about business. And during those times, I was also inspired to go to company leaders and say, hey, could we do better in some of these areas, like with waste management, with our energy, with talking with talking with people. And this is before sustainability was really a word. Recycling was, it was being done, but not really thought about. And the terms social impact or environmental impact weren't even part of the lexicon. But seeing that how in companies this could be created. And some of the leaders took me up on it, and we created some programs, and some were like, oh, that's just for another day. But it still kept me inspired. Unfortunately, I worked in an industry that had massive layoffs in a 10-year period. And after being laid off for the fourth time, I decided that I needed to do something else. So I went back to school and I discovered a certificate in the business of social impact. The business of social impact. It's like, this is what I've been thinking about for most of my life, and nobody ever put a name to it before. And I was so grateful to have this certificate. For 2 years, went to school with this certificate and came out of it with the knowledge that there's a name for it, that there are people really thinking of business as a force for good. And there's this thing called B Corp. And as a student, I was part of a team that we worked with companies in the Portland, Oregon area to help them certify as B Corp companies. And I was smitten. When I graduated, I decided that this is what I want to do. I liked it so much. I created my company, Mighty Epiphyte, to continue doing that work. And the name of the company actually comes from this biology background, because an epiphyte is a plant that is like an orchid or bromeliads. They have air roots. And the metaphor was that they create something beautiful and they're hardworking and they need a support system, and they make their company, they make something beautiful out of thin air. So that is the metaphor for Mighty Epiphyte Consulting. And that's what I started to call it. Mighty Epiphyte Consulting is a certified B Corp and a benefit corporations for good. And I support 1% for the planet and environmental and social impacts by helping companies be better at looking at their impacts, aspiring to greater impacts, measuring those impacts, reporting them, and I'll help companies certify if they wish. But the biggest thing I have empathy for is that people running a company are busy, and running a business is hard. And it's also important to be profitable. And sometimes they want to make greater impacts, and they just don't have time. So I help carry the time burden and help them with efficiencies so that they can get the impact part dialed in, as well as their business acumen, and become the company that they want to be. And one of the reasons that drives me is a Nielsen study that says that 2/3 of consumers globally are willing to pay more for products and services when they know the company has strong values. I want to help those people find these companies, to find you if you're listening. And it doesn't always have to be about even paying more. Have them pay the same amount as a competitor, but the whole thing is having people find companies with good values, because that's going to help make the world a better place.
Kim, this is amazing, and for the sake of the audience, I wanted to ask you, well, can you tell myself and the audience a little bit more about social impact entrepreneurship in general? Because there's like a conception of entrepreneurship and business, right? Which is just like for profit, and then there's the concept of nonprofit, which is about making impact and all of that. But this is basically somewhere in the middle where you're making profits, but you're also able to do good for others and make an impact. So would you be able to tell the audience a little bit more about this concept in general?
Yes, and I think there are a couple of buckets to consider. One is the social impacts, but then there's also environmental, political, and employee impacts, internally facing, externally facing impacts. And I made a Venn diagram for a blog to think about, is the product or service making an impact? Is your volunteering and philanthropy making an impact? Usually that's yes. And then is it global or is it local? And where do these things come together? So that's an overarching way to think about impact. The first is the companies that have the product or service that is an impact. That could be, there are some companies that are, like, in a way, electric cars. They are a product that once they're made have zero emissions. That's an impact. So the product itself is doing something good. And we could argue about the manufacturing of the cars, but when it comes down to it, zero emissions is doing something for good. So that's a product. But what else is that company doing? How are they supporting their employees? What are those impacts? How are they supporting the community? What are those impacts? How are they supporting the environment in addition to zero emissions? That's an impact. And thinking of things along that line. There's another way to think about it is some companies are necessary and they do things that are not impactful in and of themselves. For instance, there's a company that I love that does auto mechanics and oil changes. It's not the kindest environmental service. It's a necessary service, keeping our cars in good shape. And yet this company is a B Corp company doing something that has been historically probably more harmful to the environment than positive for people because it keeps our cars in good shape. How are they able to be a B Corp? Part of it is doing that service of auto mechanics in the best way that they can find environmentally. But then they also
a quick question, like for the sake of the audience, like can you tell them more about what B Corp is? Because I think
yes,
a lot of people have heard about C Corp and
yes,
LLC, but they've never heard of the B Corp concept.
yes. B Corp stands for Benefit Corporation, and benefit corporations and B Corps are certified by a third-party objective standard. So it's literally it's like taking an exam that looks at the impacts that a company is making, and a third party is assessing that, and it's based on point scoring in buckets of environment, social, community, customers, things of that nature. And it's a way to say that a company is doing what they say they're doing. Social impact is about the social part in the community and within a company, how employees are treated, how customers are treated, considering stakeholders, and the good that is being done through those types of relationships, what's being given. And then there's an environmental piece. And the reason this overlaps is because we all need a good environment to survive and thrive. And so looking at it as though doing good in the environment doesn't have to be separate from community and social. There is making environmental impacts can also be good social impacts. So these are the way these are. B Corp is a standard that where companies actually certify, and when they are granted their certification as B Corp, it runs for 3 years and then they have to recertify. So that whole time what they're doing is actively measuring and looking at their impacts, reporting them, and looking for ways to make even greater impacts and being measured on that by an outside party. So it gives consumers the confidence that if it goes back to what I said about wanting companies to be found, being a B Corp is becoming an increasingly more recognizable standard of certification. And it's also an online directory. So you can go to bcorporation.net and look up companies by city, by sector, by products. So there are ways to do that. There are other ones as well. Benefit Corporations for Good is in the US. in several states. That is another way to certify with an objective third-party standard based on those same things. What are you doing? And profitability matters as well. It's also about running a good business, but it's about thinking of how to run the business, making the best positive impacts on the world and not making as many negative impacts while running a business.
So Kim, you're going back to the example you're giving of the person with an oil and change company that was historically like like oil, it doesn't run well there, right? So how did they get certified in the first place?
I'm not privy to them. They're not a client, but it's because of the things that they do in and for the community, with and for their employees, with partners, and really measuring those good things that they do. Some of it's philanthropy, some of it is actually employee benefits and looking at how they're doing there, and also with the community. It's where are they giving, where are they showing up, and being able to measure it. So it's what's within the business and what is outside the business.
Kim, one of the main reasons I wanted to get you on this podcast is because our generation, the Gen Y and the Gen Z generation, are very environmentally driven and
Yes.
they want to make a lot of social impact. But a lot of times, like they have like a limiting mindset in regards to entrepreneurship and business, and like how can you be profitable and also like make an impact as well. And a lot of it has to do with the understanding of equity. So would you be able to like tell the audience a little bit more about how that is possible and all of that?
Indeed. And I'll start with the profitability first. It is imperative, I think, as a business advisor, and I also on the side advise emerging businesses and people who are starting a business. And it still comes down to really understanding your metrics, your profit and loss statements, the finances, and being able to make a profitable business. So that needs to be bedrock no matter what, because an impact business that is losing money eventually will not be an impact business. And we just don't run that way. But businesses for good still need to be strong business profit margin businesses. And with that, looking at where the impacts can be made. Often it's with partnerships with nonprofits. The way I also look at it is my company is a service company. I cannot make big impacts in the environment, but I will support the ones who can. So that's one way to think about it. It's where do we support through volunteerism and philanthropy those who can make strong businesses or strong impacts. But the other thing is always considering the profitability is looking at what are the impacts that a company is currently doing and how can those become more efficient? And this is what I'd love to sit and work with companies about is really examining those and seeing the forest for the trees and being an outsider who comes in to partner with a company and says, this is what I'm observing. What do you see? And doing what they can, because when a company is found for the good work they're doing and more customers come in, then you grow that profit margin to be able to make greater impacts. That's why it's a journey. It isn't just one thing for a year and say, well, we'll always make every year the same amount of impact. It can grow as the profitability grows and hopefully bring more customers to you because they're looking for you to make those impacts. But the other thing that is not talked about as much is it can get tricky. Thinking of impacts as what are you putting in? Say it's a donation. What is the output? You give a donation, the money goes somewhere, somebody gets something, that's an output. But I don't think we talk enough about what are the outcomes. And that's where equity comes in. And there's a lot of focus on human-centered design, which is important, but we also need to consider equity-centered design as well. And it isn't about assuming what someone needs and where to put our money and our resources and our time, but trying to find out through good due diligence is from the receiver's point of view, what do they need? What would be best for them without assumption, and then being able to make that impact and try and measure as well as good as possible what are the outcomes for those receivers. Because when we're making impacts, it's usually for someone else. And that someone else could be in the environment, it could be wildlife, it could be trees, it could be water. And in community, it could be access to wildlife, shade from trees, and clean water. So they're not always, they're not inseparable. We can think of these as buckets to make impacts, but they're affecting someone somewhere. So that is my goal, and one of the things I think about constantly in improving myself and my thinking, and working with my own company, is working with other companies to ask these questions and really have some deep thought about where is the equity centered practice, for what outcomes are we making either with our product or our service, philanthropy or giving, globally or locally, and really think of everything that way and then be able to measure it.
So Kim, I know you mentioned about wildlife and everything, and well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, connected
Mhm.
to connected to this, is like, yes, we have to focus on equity, but like, how, let's say somebody wants to start a business, right? In when it comes to like like when it's connected to like environment and biodiversity, and they wanted to connect it in a way where it's good for the environment, but they also need to create profits, and like they're new to this industry altogether, or like new to social impact entrepreneurship. How would you go about advising such a person, like if they've never been in this space before?
Yes, I think it depends on the sector and the type of company, but there are several ways to think about the environment, and that is, what do we as individuals in that company impact in the environment, both positive and negative? Like, how much driving do we do? How much remote work do we do? How much is there manufacturing involved? How is that done? Things of that nature. And that's controllable somewhat within the company. Then the other question is, say you're manufacturing clothing or backpacks or something like that. What is the source of the materials? And what does that look like? And there's, you can buy polyester anywhere, but is that good for the environment? Generally, no. We know it isn't. Where are the manufacturers who are doing really environmentally focused manufacturing of materials? So that's one way for a manufacturing company to think of, what is my source? What does that look like? For service-based companies, it's not nearly as much, because service is a brain trust. So it's about giving, donating time and money and supporting others. And also, who are the clients we're working with? I make the greatest impacts through helping a client make greater impacts. That's how I do it. And then I support nonprofits who make impacts that I can never make on my own. So it's thinking about it in those ways. That's why working with consumer goods and manufacturing companies is also challenging and a great deal of fun, because when we sit back and consider everything down to the source, it's amazing. John Oliver did a really good YouTube, it's on YouTube, a program about chocolate. And he talks about how so many people love chocolate. And then he really takes it down to, are you considering the source? And there are a couple of companies who are B Corp and emerging B Corp in chocolate, who take it to knowing where the bean comes from, how people are treated, who's hired, because they shouldn't be children, and being able to take it from there forward, and every step of the way consider, what's the negative impact? How do we avoid it? How do we still make chocolate with a positive impact? So it can become a very, very deep, but this is what we bring it to, is what is the equity? Who's being harmed? Who's being helped? Who's being left out, to get chocolate to consumers who like chocolate?
So Kim, like I grew up in the Middle East, right, for a long time
Mhm.
and for a number of years. And over there, like it's the main thing that they sell is basically oil, right? And
Yes.
then and
Yeah.
then it basically oil, petroleum, and all of these products and all most of the cars right now all across the world are using this. But one of the greatest revelations I had during my time there was that money runs the world, right? Because oil is so profitable and because all the cars are using it, so they have all these companies with a lot of money that are lobbyists in the government that are basically they're basically creating these so-called scientific articles that promote uh, like fake science articles which are promoting like oil related stuff. So my question so basically my point that I'm saying is that and my question to you would be how do you basically create a sense of morality and like a pro-environmental kind of thing that is based on reality when you have all this other side, this anti-environment side that is just publishing all this fake stuff in order for the sake of making money? Because in the end, it's all coming down to profits, right?
Right. So a term came up 20, 30 years ago called greenwashing. And that is the antithesis of making positive impacts. Uh, to look like a company is doing well with their marketing, but kind of washing over the fact that there are negative impacts happening. And that's a buyer beware. This is a big issue because, and not one I can solve in a podcast or even think about without discussing with a lot of people, but what you're saying is very real, that there are motivators and some of it is money, and that will probably continue for a while. So where I put my optimism is in all the companies that are saying, okay, we know this happens. Sometimes you just can't fight against it, but working around to run our daily lives and our daily businesses in ways that do better in where we can control it and help the organizations that can do a lot of good, and try to also think, because it's easy to compromise, right? And there's, for instance, I love to travel. Air, aircraft travel, car travel is a negative environmental impact. Will I stop traveling? No, I can't. But will I consider how to minimize that as much as possible and then find ways to offset that by doing something good somewhere else? That becomes part of it. But the real thing is being honest about it. And that's why when we talk about impacts, it's about examining, improving, measuring, and reporting impacts, and also being honest about the ones that may not be so good. But thinking about things like airline travel, then also what if airline travel stopped completely? There would be a lot of people out of jobs. So where do we balance it? What I hope and what we look to is that the innovators for the future are looking to make some of those things better environmentally and socially and reduce the negative impacts through innovation, but still, because it's unrealistic to
So
say we would stop airline travel. See, so that's the big picture of it.
So Kim, this is one of the biggest topics of like my generation, like the Gen Y generation and also the Gen Z
Right.
generation is how do you make environment friendly things like like emissions and all of that stuff and also cars and air travel, like how do you make it environment friendly and make it profitable? Because the greatest thing that's stopping us from getting to the new era where we are in tune with the environment and also creating social impact is the profitability factor. And this is just a hardcore reality. Like
Right.
even if you look at the government, like you look at the Green New Deal that they proposed a few years ago, and then you had heavy opposition. It came down to profits and the economy. And I feel like and the only thing that can actually solve this is what you are talking about, social social impact entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
which is pro environment friendly, like where where you're looking into equity, you're looking into profits, but you're doing it in a way where it's sustainable. And so basically, what our generation, a Gen Z generation, is asking is, how do we do that?
Big question. I'm going to just dial back a little bit because just since I was a kid and then, going up through school and college, I've always been pro environment and trying to do as much as possible. And your generation and others are doing so many wonderful things talking about it. And I think every generation is happy to have the help and to move it forward and to have more voices. But even those from a while ago are still rallying and doing as much as possible for it. There's two ways to do it. One is support the companies who are doing the best possible that they can at the time and are making the innovations. I'm very optimistic because of there are clean tech incubators where there are companies developing new ways of doing things. And tech also meaning everything from aerospace to your laundry detergent. The other thing is helping each other and how we live. And an example is I ran an experiment last year in cleaning supplies in my house, just personal. And I tried to find companies that have zero plastic. I found three. And as I was getting rid of everything with plastic, I would alternate and do laundry and clean and do things without telling anyone and trying out these different products. Nobody noticed, nobody complained. Nobody said, oh, the clothes are suddenly dirtier than they used to be. And once I got rid of all the plastic bottles of things, I revealed that there were three companies, three products that I liked, and we're going to go to them. Now, in my house, my cleaning supplies, laundry, and cleaning are 100% zero plastic. If we talk to each other about that and say, you can do it too, and it doesn't cost me anymore, because I also looked at the cost of it. Trying to do that in food is a much bigger challenge because no matter how much I go to the farmer's market and buy and bring my own bags and all those things, there's still plastic. And I was just looking at plastic. Then there's other things to think about, like what is transportation? This is when it comes to knowing the source of the things you're doing, where are your supplies coming from? So think about it about where you live and how you want to live, and then taking that into a company, but also telling others and letting the ripples go out. And one of my tricks is for gifts, I started of those products that I found that are zero plastic. I now give those gifts to as a gift to other people to get them started on it.
Nice.
And so they can try it and helping people think it's their idea as well. Spreading the word, social media, really challenging ourselves first is a good way to do it. And then choosing those companies that aspire to do well and help them do well are the ones that already are. Then there's another thing, and that is through policy. One is to write letters to companies that are doing things that you don't like and saying, I'm not going to support you anymore. But get your friends to do it too, get your colleagues to do it, get your suppliers to do it. And then the third thing that I really found in 2023, because of the landmark case with Montana, when our Children's Trust won a case for the children of Montana, who, with an equity centered lens, include children from the tribal nations in Montana. And they won a case to say that these children deserve a, a clean environment future. That organization is doing something environmental, they're doing something for human rights, and they're doing it through policy and law. So I can't do any of those things, but I can support them. So this is the other way we get to making improvements and to noticing those things and to recognizing that there are powerful negatives out there, but there are also powerful positives. So how do we get together behind the powerful positives and find out who they are and support them?
So Kim, there's a story that came to my mind as you're mentioning this, and especially about policy, and it was like about Nikola Tesla. So apparently, like about about
Okay.
100 years ago, right? He was getting backed by JP Morgan, and so apparently he had this model for energy, like pro environmental energy electricity,
Mhm.
right? And which would not require oil or diesel or anything like that. And then JP Morgan basically stopped backing him because he was afraid that if he backed this endeavor, then the companies would not be able to make profit. And so so a lot of what but my point that I'm trying to make is a lot of like ideas, innovative ideas are out there that where people want to implement it, but because there are powerful lobbyists and powerful like companies out there that see that this will harm their profits, they're going to actually try to stop these ideas from flowing through. Because yes, a lot of people have ideas for making this world a better place, for having impact and doing biodiversity and all that, but they're not able to do that because of financial backing or because of like forces that feel that there's a threat. But I know we talked about this, but that's why this is such an interesting podcast, you know?
Yes, indeed. Well, and you're right. And I think knowing history is important as well, because the reason there are so few trains in the LA area is because of the early industrial revolution, and they realized that money was in cars and tires. So you don't want to have trains because you want people to drive ride in cars, and then tires were big. And the story of Diesel the man, Diesel who invented diesel, his whole goal was to help small rural farmers with cleaner energy. That was his whole goal. It was taken up and militarized, and the story is fascinating. And it's worth knowing that history. So what you're talking about in terms of what's happening now has been happening over time. And it's right. And so part of it, I think, is to keep the optimism, to know who to vote for, which can be difficult, and rally together and do the best we can. But I'm in the same boat you are. It is frustrating, and it makes me sad sometimes. So that also just looking in and supporting the companies that are and those that are trying to build some power, because there are some wins. And that that's all I know right now. But what I would like to do is learn with you. How can we make greater progress? Because this is a journey we're all on together. And I don't have all the answers for that kind of a big question, like those political questions of who's being supported and where's the money that's hard to fight. That's been looming for decades, maybe even centuries.
I mean,
And
Kim,
we can
yeah,
make change together, but we have to work at it together.
on a national scale, right? This like on a national scale, especially like the Gen Z and Gen Y are asking like, what is the American dream going to be about, right? And like obviously for them, it's about a lot of it is about financial freedom, but in terms of like what is the vision for America, like like a lot of people differ on that. But in your opinion, from your background as a high impact, like as a social impact entrepreneur and who is pro environment, what is your vision of an idea of like the American dream for like the future for this generation and like the future generations?
I can tell you from my opinion, and I am the direct descendant of an immigrant. So that's why I lived overseas, because my father was from the UK. And what I think is the American dream is equity. And what I mean by that is equity in housing, equity in businesses being financed, equity in education. And equity is different than equality. Equity means who needs more, and being able to bring people up. I would like to see where the generational wealth we talk about is available to everyone. And that would be the dream that I hope everyone would get, is the equity to have access and to have the support, and not be just a few people. And that's what we really need to work on.
Kim, I couldn't agree more. And I would like to add that at least like for like the current like the Gen Z generation, a lot of them are like they're more entrepreneurial and they're also
Mhm.
into creating a positive impact and they also are pro environment friendly. Like this is the prototype, the archetype for the future generations. But ultimately with anything, right? The present the future has to have a fight with the past. And there's
Yes.
always the old era and the old way of doing things. And it's very rigid and stubborn, right? And they're not going to give way. They're fixed in their ways. They want to do things a certain way. But then there's the new generation, and then there's the new era. Like there's the new way of doing things. And these two Americas ultimately have to resolve and come to a common conclusion, right? That we cannot hold on to the past where we have to go to the future. But like at least for me, like that's how the American dream is going to play out.
Mhm. No, I think so. And I think working together and having that innovative mindset is a big part of it. And every step of the way, looking at how are we doing? Are we making progress? And is that progress good? And what are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the outcomes? And how can we build on it?
No, totally, Kim. And which brings me to this question. Like, I know you told us a little bit more about your company, Mighty Epiphet, and
Mhm.
what it means. But can you tell me, like, what are the events that finally led you to creating the company against, like, for the sake of the audience? And you can tell a little bit more about this.
Mhm. I created it because I was so enamored with doing B Lab certifications as a student at Portland State, but also I was hired for a digital startup, a tech startup. And I wanted, as I was starting that, I was hiring people with my boss. And I said from the beginning, I want this to be a B Corp company. We can do this. And sadly, the company only lasted 6 months because there was no money. And it was rather sad. But I created my company because I wanted to give those people that we'd hired, most of them developers, a place where they would never have a gap in their resume and where they would be able to work as 1099 under me while I was building my company to do uh, full service impact support and B Corp certifications. And it grew from there. And it's growing now to the point where in 2024, I am not only doing my one-on-one consulting, which I will continue to do and help individual companies. I also help train employees how to basically work myself out of a job, how to train them, how to become prepared for a B Corp certification and measure the impacts and write reports for their company. But also a cohort model where I can bring businesses together so they're learning from each other and making connections where we're building understandings and basics of strong businesses, but also getting into the mission, vision, values, and what it means to start measuring, reporting impacts and give them the tools as a group. And I'm calling that the Mighty Impacts Continuum because it is a continuum. You don't just become B Corp and stop thinking about it because it's not checking a box. It is saying this is a journey and we're constantly motivating ourselves to do better, to keep looking, to keep thinking, to ask the equity questions, to ask how are we doing constantly. It's like it's constantly checking in. And I think that's important. Is why I chose the word continuum because it is a continuum, like a journey. And I'm optimistic about it because the more people and companies we meet that are doing these things, the more it feels as like we're propelled to go forward together.
Nice,
And
Kim.
I think that's terrific.
Yeah, that is amazing, and I definitely support your endeavors regarding this matter because it is so important, you know, because it's not at the end of the day, it's not only about like creating profits. You have to like take care of the people around you and know that you're actually in tune and harmony with nature, and also like you're doing something for the good of humanity as well. Because ultimately, that's what we're here about, you know, like the entire point of entrepreneurship and business is ultimately to learn the service mentality of like serving others, right? It's not just about the money. It's ultimately like in a certain light, it's spiritual, you know? Like
I love that. I love
like
that.
ultimately everything is spiritual. Like we're going to a higher level of like we're attuning ourselves with nature and harmonizing with God and his laws, and like to do that in a environment friendly, like a social impact way is the entire point, you know. But you have to do it in a way where you earn a living and you're financially free as well, and that's perhaps like ultimately the ultimate lesson we can learn, you know.
I concur. Well said.
And Kim, is there any other projects that you're doing other than this that you'd want the audience to get a glimpse into?
I am behind me is a photo of where I live, and it is a forest that my husband and I are actively regenerating, learning. It goes back to my being a biology major. It's coming out with joy, and we have help finding a grant from a conservation district that's helping us build out what's called the riparian area. That is an area where there's water. It's a pond and a stream to help it be better for salmon habitat, working with neighbors in that way, and also just doing our best to create better habitat by understanding what nature does there and helping regenerate that land and that soil. And my goal is to try and do that more through time as I get money and profit to buy land and do more of this as I can. But right now, this is a start and it feels really good. And we can all do it even in our backyards, planting native plants, bringing in those kind of plants that attract pollinators, not having as much lawn, having more diversity. It's amazing what you can see in your own backyard when things are going well. We
That
can
is
all
amazing.
contribute something.
No, I mean totally. Like I had like a few roommates back in when I like back in Austin, and one of the things we did was we planted a garden, you know, at the backyard of the house, and it was interesting. I mean, they did most of the planting, but I was just like helping financially with like the seeds and all that stuff.
That's fantastic.
It, yeah, ultimately, like it just keeps you in tune with nature, you know, and like it's also like it's like a good thing to do like in your spare time. But Kim, how can the audience connect with you and get to know more about you and your work and everything that you do?
Uh, yes, my website is mightyepiphyte.com, and that is mighty MIGHTYEPIPHYTE.com. And that's the best way to connect with me. I'm also on LinkedIn as Kim Aldrich Flick, and Mighty Epiphyte is the company page. Those are the two best ways to contact me.
That is amazing, Kim. And Kim, I'm so glad that you took the time to do this podcast with me and raise awareness about the concept of social impact entrepreneurship with a pro-environmental stance, you know, because this is probably like the future of America and the world. Like we have to basically go into this new era. Otherwise, if the environment is gone and like we live in a self-centered lifestyle, then that will ultimately lead to the failure of our civilization. So I'm really glad with what you're doing, and I do hope that you take the time to come back to the show at a later time.
I would love to. I would love to. And I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy, your optimism, your thoughtfulness, your deep questions. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. And I want to conclude this episode by letting my fellow extraordinary Americans know that, hey, look, there's an extraordinary within each and every one of us, and it's our duty to awaken it and unleash it. Until next time, bye for now. Hey everyone, thank you for watching Exploring America. If you like what you see, please do subscribe to our podcast and share it with others. Remember that the best investment that you can make in your lifetime is in your own financial education, for it is knowledge that truly sets us free. Also, remember that inflation is diluting your purchasing power, which in turn increases financial bondage. The practical thing to do is to protect the loss of your purchasing power and invest in precious metals or the right cryptocurrencies. Lastly, never forget that you are an extraordinary American. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.